surprise you to hear that I'm often asked what kinds of books I like to represent. It just happened at the lunch table. I get that because I know that potential authors and artists want to direct their queries to the most receptive literary agent, which is smart. And I've always tried to provide answers to this question that are practical. Obvious and tweetable answers such as, I want funny middle grade, dystopian YA, picture books with a universal theme, stories that matter. But as the years come and go, and I look into my heart, if I'm to be truthful, the real answer is this. I'm looking for people who are on a journey. I'm looking for people who want to break their hearts wide open and never close them again. I'm looking for people who can only say, why not? I used to say, too, that Pippin is an agency devoted exclusively to children's books, but I can't say that anymore. Over the years, we've morphed into an agency that's devoted exclusively to accompanying artists and authors on their path, wherever it might take them, however many twists and blind spots and U-turns and hills and bumps they may encounter. We're here to help you through. I want to talk to you today about one journey in particular I've been privileged to go on with author and artist David Small. But even more important than the specifics of his experience, I want to share with you some things I've learned from accompanying him, because what I've learned may be useful to you. I want to tell you about the traits I've noted along the way that drive some people to excellence that knows no bounds. And I'll share with you some tools you'll need in your pack as you walk down your own road, a road that can sometimes be incredibly lonely, a road where you can sometimes see only 3 feet in front of you, a road that always leads you back to yourself. As my sister Allison said so eloquently in a speech for her 25th college reunion, I remember asking Tom Calcagni late one night at a party, how can you fling yourself off that tower? For years I, the non-skier, had admired ski jumpers, how they arced their bodies into the unseen air. It's no big deal, he said. We were sitting side by side in 2 large green chairs. The air is soft. It's like a pillow. It cushions you. You just go into your tuck and do it. Allison continues with, what he didn't tell me was that the cushion was there and then not there, and it could move you all over the place, depending on air pockets and wind gusts. I know that now. But what I've always gone back to is that first, long ago comment. You just go into your tuck and do it. Allison's words are ones I come back to again and again. These are powerful words. You might be here because you want to get going, and if you're committed, there's no turning back. And the only person you can fail is yourself. And the only way you can fail is by quitting. Because you'll be making your own map as you go along. There's no destination, only many stops and curves and mountains and slopes and hills and valleys along the way. In any case, I'm so pleased to meet you. David Small's Stitches was published as an adult graphic memoir by Bob Weil at Norton in the fall of 2009, and went on to receive a generous number of accolades, including being named a National Book Award finalist. I began working with David Small in 1999, and just a year later, David found himself at what was deemed to be the pinnacle of his children's book career. He was the king of the cats, having been knighted with the Caldecott Medal for So You Want to Be President. But upon receiving this prestigious award, he had to begin again. And he had to look at himself and say, what next? He had to work within his own emotional state, a state in which his insecurity about his future remained steadfast. His doubt required that his dance card be full. It required that he be scheduled out with book projects several years in advance. His fear of going hungry paralyzed him. In the midst of this, I told him that I hoped one day he'd be brave and secure enough to finish one book without knowing what was next, that he believed enough in himself to face the field with his arms outstretched, to take in the sun shining down and the blue sky over his head and breathe quietly and own the possibility held there. But until then, I would support, if not endorse, his need to be booked with projects in advance. He took on the task of illustrating many children's books over the years, some of them remarkable and some of them not. And he was very, very busy. Several years later, innocently enough, his journey into himself began in earnest. At that time, he showed me a chapter he'd written for a book tentatively titled Symptoms, all in prose. He sent it along over email, neither of us knowing that he was embarking on a work that would require all of what he knew about himself and his life and his heart, and then some more. I was very much taken with the voice of this piece, and I told him so. There was an honesty in this little autobiographical short that went straight to my heart. But the years came and went as they do, and every so often I would ask him about that thing he'd shared with me called Symptoms, that little manuscript I'd connected with and couldn't forget about. He'd brush me off, although never rudely, and we'd get back to picture books. But as time went on, he allowed his schedule to open up a bit, and so did his heart and mind. As he became more and more comfortable with not knowing precisely what he'd be doing for the next few years, little by little, he was able to focus more and more on his inner life and on his dreams. He was, slowly and surely, finding the freedom to look inside himself, with all his despair and with the joy that accompanies it. He was opening his heart to his life and to all that he is. And shortly thereafter, one night at a restaurant with his wife, he had what could maybe be called a panic attack. Or maybe it was more like a summons from himself to show up and be accountable to himself. Over dinner with his wife at the Fisher Lake Inn, in the exact spot on his neck where his childhood cancer had been located, a lump grew before their eyes. A lump that looked conspicuously like the cancerous tumor that had grown on him at the age of 14. Right there before them it appeared. It was at this point that David went into the bathroom at the inn, looked in the mirror, and faced himself. He knew that he was either going to die right there, or he was going to find a way to go back in time and write his memoir being the form of therapy that would save his life, that would force him to make peace with his childhood. He chose to live. He chose to tell his story. But how would he tell it? Although he's a beautiful writer, words did not come easily to him. The answer to how he would write it revealed itself on a trip to Paris, where he was captivated by some of the graphic novels he saw there. And voila, there was his solution right in front of him. Something he'd known all along. His pictures are his words. He's an artist. He drew pictures as fast as a writer types, and with abandon. The pictures that would later be called stitches came pouring out of him. How fitting that a book that started out with the name Symptoms, which often are used to diagnose an illness, became stitches, the very stitches that are often used to help heal a wound. For a few years, all I did was hold my apron open to catch. Every week, sometimes more than once a week, he called to share his latest epiphany. Why was he so good at drawing anatomy? He'd grown up looking at x-rays, the same x-rays that gave him cancer, the same X-dose radiation to which his father had subjected him, his father being a radiologist in the 50s on the forefront of this new technology to cure sinus problems, from which David as an infant suffered. The stories poured out, the memories flooded back, and because I received the gift of being chosen to listen to those memories, many told through dreams, my life changed too. We were good company for each other. Just as his heart broke open to find the pictures, to find his childhood and his life, mine broke open to catch them. Eventually, of course, we needed to make shape of the story once the deluge of magic and miracles subsided. And we also needed to choose whether the book should be submitted as a young adult or an adult book. We decided to publish it as an adult book and curve down to teenagers, rather than publish it as a YA book and curve up. And once the book was acquired, David had to delve back into himself again and come up with more. His heart had to go wider, as wide as it could possibly stretch, to receive the rest of the story. His heart had to go so wide, it nearly broke. And that's how it became clear to me that it's foolish to define what I'm looking for as exclusively one thing or another. Because I'm looking for people to travel with. People who want to jump off without knowing exactly where they're going. People who are willing to go forward without knowing if they'll find an air cushion or an air pocket. People who can't stand still and won't give up. Brave people. Brave people who can't do anything but go forward. Who will die a certain spiritual death by not moving. Who would rather ask, why not, than why. There's so much more possibility in why not. This is why I do what I do. This is why I can't succinctly tell you what I'm looking for other than to say, I'll travel with you. So you, like David, are setting out on the road, not knowing where it leads. What joy and surprise would there be in knowing where we're going? There wouldn't be any. There might be security, but why then are you an artist if what you want is security? You're at the beginning, and you must travel lightly. But there are a few essential things you must take, and a few dangers I want to warn you about. So listen closely and be brave. The things I suggest carrying with you have come in handy for those who've gone on ahead. Those who are calling you, beckoning you to come along. David Small has been contemplating his next graphic novel. In a way, he's again at the pinnacle, but he's also in the valley. For where does he go from stitches? He starts over, that's what he does. He meets himself, and he's a very different and larger self than the pre-stitches self. But once again, he has to go into his tuck and set forth, once again not knowing where he'll end up, where he'll find an air cushion, or where the wind gusts will blow him. I've been reading a lot of Grimm's fairy tales lately in the Juniper Tree collection by Laurie Siegel and Maurice Sendak. And it's probably from reading these tales that I began to think about skin and bones. I was particularly struck by one of the least known tales, Brother Gailey. In this story, Brother Gailey and St. Peter set out on a journey, and St. Peter has the ability to bring the dead back to life, which Brother Gailey tries to exploit to make himself rich. But that's not what caught my attention on my latest reading. It was the way in which St. Peter brings the dead back to life that hit me and sent me spinning and then stopped me abruptly and made me think. I referenced this scene, quote, "Bring me a kettle of water," St. Peter said, upon seeing the king's dead daughter. And when they had brought it, he asked everyone to leave, and only Brother Gailey was allowed to stay with him. Then he cut the dead girl in pieces and boiled them. And when all the flesh had fallen off, he took out the beautiful white bones and laid them on a table and put them in their natural order. And when that was done, he came and stood before them and said 3 times, "In the name of the most holy Trinity, you who are dead, arise." And at the 3rd time the princess arose, alive and healthy and beautiful. Now the king was overjoyed and said, "Ask for your reward, and if it's half my kingdom, I'll give it to you." I'm struck by the fact that before St. Peter brought the dead girl back to life, he put her beautiful white bones in their natural order. Everything about the dead daughter was in its natural order before she burst forth again, healthy and beautiful and strong. Her old self was dead. Her blueprint was reestablished and reset. David's was too. How could it not be after stitches? She was born over again, and she was beautiful. And though you may not have St. Peter to attend you, you must do what you can to be in your natural order too, before you set out, which simply means you must bring all of yourself forward, all the pieces of yourself that are locked up or begging to be left behind. You must call to them and welcome them along. Your childhood sorrow at having no friends or being called fag, the way your father spoke to you when you disappointed him the first time, how you felt the day you understood that 9/11 was the beginning of the new world, the time your heart was happiest, just ready to burst out of your chest, your own deepest demons and greatest strengths, your struggles, your victories, your honesty. All of you that you can possibly call forth at this time. The rest will reveal itself to you as you walk or skip or tumble or run or crawl along. Bring all that you can find of yourself and who you are to bear. And if you've left any pieces behind, eventually when the time is right and you're able, you'll go back for them. Because those pieces you've left behind will gradually slow you down. They'll get in your way. Eventually those missing pieces will call for your attention, and you'll go back and get them. What also struck me was the reference to the dead girl's skin. The skin that had to be boiled off before her bones could be set right and she could be full of life again. The layers of skin have been peeled and boiled away. Just as David Small peeled away layer after layer as he created stitches, often through his dreams and his phone calls to me and his talks with himself and his wife, you must peel away yours to prepare yourself to get to your bones. You must peel away your pride, your ego, your judgment, and with that will go your worry about how others judge you, your perception of yourself. Layer after layer must go to get to the person inside, to get to your bones. Find yourself. Find yourself whether you've never been published before or have won a Caldecott medal. We're equals here. The irony is that just as you'll need to peel away your protective layers to find yourself, to see your bones and to get to your heart, you'll need to preserve a very thick skin too. You'll need to be able to summon your skin again like a protective cloak, to shield yourself from the critics and jeerers and those who are envious and who think you are not worthy. Those who are envious and who think you are not worthy. Those who can bring you down with a word or an odd glance, or with their expectations. We'll talk more about that. For now, you've found what you can of yourself and you have your cloak handy. You've shed your layers, and that process has exposed your heart, an essential, indispensable tool, the mother of all tools, and the most important one to have with you. It's better if your heart's not only exposed but cracked open as far as it can go, but even if it's only cracked just a little right now, or at least willing to be cracked open, that's good. It's good enough. As one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, writes in a poem titled Lead, "I tell you this to break your heart, by which I mean only that it break open and never close again to the rest of the world. I love that it breaks open and never closes again to the rest of the world. Kathy Appelt says it this way: a story's heart requires the teller to crack open her own heart. It's the question I pose to my story. Where is it that the heart cracks open? Here's the thing, Kathy says. Where the heart cracks open is where our deepest longings lie, and that's what story is all about. It's where our characters ache for something that's missing. It's where we feel the tug and pull of our own patch of ground. It's where the goose spreads her substantial wings and flies straight into the stars. There. Come on then, let's follow. Where is your heart? Let's go there. I think Kathy's saying that not only do you need to bring along your cracked open heart, but you must go to the very thing that makes your heart crack open. That's what you need to bring, and that's where you need to go. So, you've decided to be brave, to go into your tuck. You've peeled away your layers, but you've kept your cloak handy for when you need protection, and put as much of yourself as you can together in the best order you're able. You found your heart in there when you peeled away the layers. Your nerve endings are on fire, and this is how it's supposed to be. And remember this, everybody, no matter how celebrated, starts out the same way with each story he writes, with each story that matters. This is the state in which you begin your journey. This is how you begin your walk along the road to your own work. You'll know when you're there. It's fraught and full of joy, but also full of joy's bedfellow sorrow, just there below the surface. I go to Khalil Gibran in The Prophet. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. When you're joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that's giving you joy. When you're sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you're weeping for that which has been your delight. Your tuck, the beginning, your heart, which contains your joy and your sorrow. You'll know you're there, and the currents will be strong, but you'll navigate through, and you wouldn't trade this state for anything in the world. You'll know. Now you've set out, you're heading into yourself and your work, and you must pay attention. I go back to Mary Oliver for a moment, who says, to pay attention, this is our endless and proper work. She also provides some directions, instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. You must pay attention to yourself, because you're the only one on this road. Don't look to the left or to the right. When I was 11, I had saved some allowance money and was off to the Riverside Mall in Utica, New York to spend it. I found myself in a Walden Books. I found myself in the back right corner of this Walden Books, looking at the most beautiful words in a small book of blue line drawings called The Desiderata by Max Ehrmann. I've kept this book at my side all these years, and I'd like to share a sentence from it today. A sentence I find it necessary to remind myself and my authors of almost daily. It's good to remember as you travel. If you compare yourself to others, you become vain and bitter. For always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. You become your own enemy when you compare yourself to others. Your worst potential enemy is yourself. In fact, the only enemy you need to worry about. When your enemy self rears her ugly head, which she'll surely do, gather your cloak about you and don't let her in. I asked Kate DiCamillo, whom I've accompanied through the seasons of her writing life, and there have been warm summers and unforgiving winters. I asked her to write about this enemy of self. Here's what she wrote, starting with a quote from Walt Kelly. We have met the enemy, and he is us. Or rather, I've met the monster and she is me, Kate says. She is a three-headed monster, and I do battle with her every day that I write. I've labeled her heads thusly: ego, laziness, and fear. All three heads are wily. All three heads talk a lot. They each have their favorite phrases. Ego says, "Who do you think you are to be doing this?" Laziness says, "Tomorrow would be a great day to start." Fear says, "It would be better not to try at all." Kate continues, "I've learned to accept that the monster will always be present, and that the heads will always be talking, and that my job is not to vanquish the monster, but to achieve some dialogue with it. When I feel reluctant to start, commit, continue, or try again, I go and talk to the monster. I work to figure out which leering, drooling, smirking head is holding me back: ego, laziness, or fear. And once I've identified it, I can talk to it and work around it. I've learned too that the monster can be useful. Ego is a good but mean editor. Laziness is sometimes warranted. Naps, breaks, being willing to just let myself be. Fear can help me identify the very voice, story, or challenge that is loaded for me, the one thing I need to embrace rather than walk away from. Thank you, Kate. Ego, laziness, and fear, all enemies of your writer self. Don't let them overcome you. Stand in your power before them. Wrap yourself in your cloak when they rear their ugly heads. Look them in the eye and talk them to submission. Talk them to your freedom. And here's where I reluctantly step up to the plate. Because right here, at this very juncture, my own enemy self is trying to interrupt. She's loud. I see her waving her arms, asking me what makes me think I can stand here and talk about writing to you. Well, I'm not going to let her in. Because what makes me know I can talk to you about writing here is that I'm one of you too. A writer with my third book just published, a fourth coming out in 2 weeks, and a fifth scheduled for fall 2013. I had been a literary agent for 9 years when I found myself with a story to tell, with a character named Dessert Schneider who would not leave me be. She came knocking loudly and refused to be ignored. I wrote my first novel, Dessert First, on New Jersey Transit, on my commute, and in any spare moment I had. Dessert was at once the new love of my life and a terrible burden. How could I, a literary agent to some of the most prestigious authors in America, dare to write my own story? I was so comfortable in my role as guide and companion, and I was so good at giving advice. And I was so full of fear of failure and of being exposed and worried about whether my authors would be able to accept my being one of them as well as their advocate. How would I navigate these waters? I knew absolutely that I would have to. It was clear that this character had moved right in and was planning to stay. I was barreling forth, and turning back was not something I could consider. I would not be opting out. I would have to go into my tuck. And I can't say that I stopped and consciously did just that. It was more like Dessert Schneider pushed me off the cliff. And I brought my knees up to my chest, and there I was, plunging down, but at least in a tuck. In an instant, my many layers of protection, mostly accumulated from the power of being an agent, flew off. They were gone. I was naked to the world. I was extremely uncomfortable. I didn't know how to be myself or who I was anymore exactly. And the fears were often immobilizing. What if nobody bought my novel? What if it really sucked? What if somebody bought my novel because of my connection to some of the most successful writers on the planet? This is when I groped furiously for my cloak. A pen name, Hallie Durand. Nobody would know, at least for a while, who had written my story. It would be judged on its own merit. If it was published, I would never wonder if it was only being published because of me and my connections. It would be published because somebody fell in love with my story, apart and separate from my being a publishing insider. I'm grateful to this day for that decision. For when the book was acquired, with the publisher having no prior knowledge of whom the author was, I gained just a little bit of confidence. I cast a little vote for myself. I'd never be able to go to that particular dark, paralyzing place of thinking someone had done me a favor when my enemy self reared her head, which of course she did in all kinds of ways. When the first nasty Amazon.com review came in, my enemy self agreed with it and told me to stop writing. When the book didn't sell as well as we hoped it would, my enemy self said it was no good. And even when I received praise, my enemy self plugged my ears, refusing to allow me to take it in. The enemy is as strong as you allow her to be. And when I speak about shedding your perception of yourself and putting your bones in order, about peeling away your pride, your ego, your judgment, I speak from my own experience too. You can't make your way through life trying to meet what you perceive to be other people's expectations of who you are. But the perception enemy is a particularly strong one, and she must be kept down. What if Kate DiCamillo had continued trying to be the Southern writer that she thought people wanted her to be? She would not have written The Tale of Despereaux, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, or The Magician's Elephant. And when I talk about heart, I talk about my own too, the one I found when the layers were ripped off by the force of my plunge. My heart was right there for the world to see. And when I make the point about that your map is your own, with no directions and no guidelines, I talk from the vantage point of being an author and agent on a journey with no destination. A journey that has made me stretch way out of my comfort zone. I wouldn't have it any other way either. In the end, we're only accountable to ourselves. That goes for all of us. You have to make peace with who you are. Don't be too hard on yourself, though, and try to laugh. And remember that bravery in battle requires kindness, too. Kindness to you. And always, always remember that the only way out is through. The only way back to yourself and your stories is through. It was in my sister's novel, Allison McGee, Julia Jillian and the Art of Knowing, that I read those words. The only way out is through. So I went to the source and asked Allison if she could articulate for me how these words of Julia related to a writer's journey. Here is what she said. In my life, there are times when I've wanted to escape. Doesn't everyone? When I was 24 and the man I loved killed himself, I just wanted to escape from the grief, from the chaos, from the fact that suddenly I was in a new life that I did not want and never would have chosen. But you can't escape. You can only absorb, or better, enlarge your life. Enlarge the horizons of it, and the sense of what it can hold, and what your heart can hold, so that eventually that experience, no matter what it is, can be held within you, so that you can understand it, recognize it, accept it, and go forward with your life knowing what you do now. In Julia Jillian's case, she was stuck. She couldn't live fully because of her fear of what the book might hold, the grief that she was afraid of. But the fear eventually made her life something drab, and she realized, through her wise friend Enzo, that the only way out was through. Not something she wanted to do, but something she had to do anyway, in order to be fully alive. Thank you, my sister Allison, for such beautiful words. And there will be times on your path when you're stuck, when your lack of direction or your grief or your fear will stop you. And all of us, including David Small, get stuck. And that's when you must remember your bones, and you must remember your heart, and you must remember that you have your cloak to protect you when the elements are more than you can bear. And you must pull all of yourself forward and continue. The only way out is through. When you write, you're never writing from a piece of yourself. You're writing from your whole being. And the wider you can stretch it, the deeper your well. There's no bottom to your well as long as you keep pounding and breaking through the layers. As for your bones, give them a solid place to stand. And show us your heart in all its wide open joy and despair. That's how you'll find us readers. Your voice will be your own when you find your heart. And at some point you'll find your way back to you, but you might not know where you are at first. You'll be back where you began, but it will all be brand new. That's where David Small is now. At another point, you'll be far enough along and sure enough of your footing to look back. This is when you can see how far you've come. That is when you can call for company, beckon people forth. You can tell them to bring themselves, all of themselves, along. Tell them to join you. And never, ever, at any point along the way, forget about the power of art. I had the extraordinary opportunity to work with William Steig, and it was he who said this: art has the power to make any spot on earth the living center of the universe. And unlike science, which often gives us the illusion of understanding things we really do not understand, it helps us to know life in a way that still keeps before us the mystery of things. It enhances the sense of wonder, and wonder is respect for life. Thank you all for coming today. I look forward to seeing you along the road as a fellow writer and literary agent. Until we meet again, be sure to take care of yourself. So long for now.